So, hello everybody. Welcome to the Complex Trauma Institute. And today I've got with me Adela Stockton, who is one of the therapists who is on our list of people who can help you if you're suffering from traumatic events. And I'll just fire some questions at Adela and see what happens. Okay. So, Adela, welcome. I'd love to know what first got you interested in working with trauma.
Yes, well, I came into counselling uh, in my 40s, and I was always drawn to working with trauma, which is kind of funny now looking back because psychodynamically, and I am a psychodynamic practitioner, any disruption to the human psyche is considered to be as a result of trauma.
Mm.
So in the first instance, I was interested in working with PTSD, people suffering with PTSD. But back then, complex trauma hadn't really been categorized or recognized in the same way as it is now. And actually, what I was working with was complex trauma.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yes. We seem to get dropped in at the deep end without anything in our training that tells us what to do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what sorts of things have you picked up along the way then that help you to deal with it now?
Well, I think in the last 7 or 8 years, I've been working much more with the body.
Mm.
Although again, psychodynamically, we work with the body anyway. We work with feelings, felt senses. So it wasn't completely alien to me to start doing that. But I think that probably the most significant thing that I've incorporated into my practice is stabilization.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um,
So, can you explain why that's so important?
well, I had always been concerned that diving into process work with somebody who is in crisis or in near crisis, or certainly living with acute complex trauma, if you like, or if you can call it that, um, it is likely to be re-traumatizing. And I always saw that as being counterproductive to
Mhm.
the point of counseling or therapy. So learning about the actual more body-centered approaches as practiced in stabilization, really, which is what stabilization is about, has made a lot of sense to me. Although it is more directive, and that contradicts the psychodynamic way. So the transition into starting to use stabilization more, and I use it rigorously now, um, was quite challenging for me. I could
Yeah.
see the sense, I could understand the sense of it, but my training was like, no, 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 you don't actually put forward suggestions for people to do things. But I realize that clinically now it is the safest way to practice, and that's supported by theory.
Mm. Yes, on some of these modalities that forbid all sorts of things, but you have to throw all that out of the window when you're working with complex trauma, don't you?
To an extent, you do, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
my practice is always fundamentally underpinned by psychodynamic thinking
Yes.
and the
Yes.
psychodynamic use of language. But
Hmm.
yes, I think working with complex trauma is a particular way of working. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's all quite new, isn't it? It's only just been recognised internationally. So,
absolutely.
yeah, we're making new rules as we go along, I think. Yeah, yeah. Um, mm, so working with the body, can you explain a bit more about how you do work with the body?
Well, I do give the, the client quite a lot of psychoeducation
Yes.
in terms of explaining that about the window of tolerance and when we go out of the window of tolerance and we feel very agitated, very hyper aroused, or conversely flat and disconnected.
Yes, that's a good word. Yes,
Yes.
for people at the other end of the spectrum. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Sorry, what was the question again? I just lost the thread.
What was I asking? About the importance of working with the
Importance
body.
of working with the body, yeah. So,
Yeah.
um, so I explained that the window of tolerance is really where we need to be if we're going to be doing any processing work. And because processing work can involve thinking about what's happened to them, which can be can be triggering and re-traumatizing, that actually using strategies that help us to feel safer in ourselves can help, i.e., stabilization, can help um, bring us back into the window of tolerance should we get triggered. So I specifically talk about movement and the
Yeah.
importance of movement, and that it doesn't have to be high velocity gym activity.
Mhm.
It can be just regular walking, regular movement, to build regular movement into their lives as part of their therapy, really. And ideally, walking in nature. And while that might sound a bit of a cliche, the reason that walking in nature is helpful, of course, is because everything that we can see, hear, smell, feel is there in nature. So it brings us our awareness to our senses, and that helps us to be more centered and more grounded and more connected to ourselves. However, movement can also be helpful just in stretching, regular stretching, and other movements like swimming or jogging or cycling, or because it helps us to release stress that gets trapped in our muscles.
Oh,
So I
yes.
explain all of that to them.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is connecting to others, because
Yes.
the connecting, so the movement is about self-regulation.
Hmm.
Connecting to others is about co-regulation.
Yes.
So that might be friends and family, of course. It might be pets. It might be, or in groups. It might be
Hmm.
an actual kind of support group or community group that we're involved in. Can be helpful. And I also explain about breathing. I mean, there are many different kinds of breathing techniques, guided breathing, but I tend to just explain that to calm ourselves down, the out breath needs to be longer than the in breath. And to raise our energy, if we're flat or disconnected, then actually a deeper in breath
Yeah.
and a shorter out breath is the key. Those are the key things. However, I do explain to them because often there is a widespread thinking that breathing is the first thing that we need to do. Well, actually, when we're really triggered and we've got the red mist or we've got fight or flight going on, the last thing we think about is actually breathing, because our body automatically goes to very light breathing. If we can, we might be able to take one or two breaths, but thinking about counting or how those breaths are is difficult. So I do explain to people that breathing might not be helpful in the first instance if they are, like I said, acutely in complex trauma or crisis, but regular practice of a breathing technique once we've settled our system a bit can be useful.
Yeah. Because because you have to bring the brain online to think about your breathing, and that doesn't happen when you're triggered.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So uh, so you find just a simple a long out breath if you're overexcited, or a long in breath if you need to be woken up. Yeah, is that right? Yeah,
Yes, that's it, it's really that simple.
quite simple.
Really that
Yeah.
simple. Hmm.
And if they practice this on a regular basis, it'll become more easy to do. Mm.
Absolutely. All of the things, really, building regular movement and connection with others and
Practicing anything.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And
absolutely.
actually communicating with people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only do that when you're um, balanced, can't you? So yeah, and your
Yes,
brain's online.
yes.
Yeah,
I mean, there are the sort of other strategies that can be utilized, like obviously if someone finds themselves in a situation, an exchange with somebody that's really triggered them, the most useful thing is for them to take themselves out of the room
yeah,
and perhaps get a drink of cold water,
yeah.
anything that brings contrast to the body. So it needs to be cold water. Uh,
Oh,
and
yes, yeah. When
yes, because it's sort
when
of,
you
yes.
steam up, yeah, yeah.
And even stretches or tensing the clenching the not clenching the fist for combat,
It's
but just
something you can
quietly in a
do
safe space,
while you're
clenching
there,
the fist
and
and relaxing,
yeah, nobody
clenching the fist and
notices.
relaxing. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Wow, terrific. Yeah, but even then, you have to be ready to do it. I think. Yeah,
you do, you do.
yeah, yeah. Fantastic. Can you tell me about a client that you're particularly pleased with, the way you had a successful result or
Well,
two? Mhm.
yeah, I think I've worked in uh, circumstances where I've worked with very extremely traumatized individuals, and so what I thought here was perhaps better to talk about small groups, if you like. So I mean, I worked in the prisons and I've worked with survivors of
Oh,
torture,
gosh, yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that work was really the most profound for me, I would
yeah,
say, um, because working with people that have very few internal or external resources available to them.
mm,
Um, but I think in terms of the torture survivors, and I'm holding sort of three people in mind here, um, certainly the telling of the story was helpful.
yes,
Now, it's not always helpful because it can be
not
too
always.
triggering, but in these three individuals' cases, and I would say that they had fairly stable beginnings in their life.
Yes,
Had
yeah,
attachment, they had good attachment, they had secure attachment,
hmm,
experience of secure attachment in their early relationships,
yeah,
which inevitably stands us in good stead.
absolutely. Good foundation. Yeah,
Yes. So that they were able to tell their story, and also bearing in mind it wasn't just me in the room, there was an interpreter there as well.
yeah,
So and in often I found that the interpreter was also a stabilizing influence in that.
yes,
Yeah. And sometimes
yeah,
the would know the interpreter from other, lawyers' appointments or doctors' appointments. So it wasn't, the interpreter wasn't necessarily a stranger to them.
hmm,
And certainly they were interpreters that were familiar to me and extremely good at their job. But there was certainly something about having their story witnessed that seemed to be helpful for them. And fortunately, the three people I have in mind actually did get their refugee status, which also was extremely helpful in their healing process because that
yeah,
afforded them a sense of belonging and a sense of safety as well. So that was
yeah,
internal safety was improved by the telling of the story in a safe place
mhm,
and having it witnessed. us making making a testimony of their story, really. And then their external safety was compounded by the fact that they got the refugee status.
Fantastic. Yeah.
But there is one other person that a client that I wanted to mention. This is I think this is quite interesting. So this individual had been a person in a position of authority and had been convicted for looking at child porn.
Mm-hmm.
And first offence, this wasn't something, that had been going on regularly. Deep feelings of shame. But what they came to realize during the work was, so this is an individual that had a history of child sexual abuse. So
Yeah.
lengthy period during their early life where they'd been sexually abused. And they realized that there was this moment where they realized that looking at the images of the children, they were actually looking for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were looking for their child self
Mm-hmm.
because photos had been taken. That was part of the abuse that they'd experienced. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the link. I mean, my feeling was that it wasn't conscious.
Mm.
And it was in that moment in the therapy room, it was one of those penny dropping moments
Yeah.
where they realized that they had been looking for themselves, whether, and that didn't matter if that was actually or
Mm.
figuratively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in as a result of that, they were able to feel compassion for themselves.
Oh, and so that stops the shame. Yes.
It was
Yeah.
immensely powerful. One of the
Yes.
most powerful moments I've experienced in the room with a client.
Wonderful.
Mm.
Wonderful. That touches me. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Mm.
it was very deep. Hmm. Mm.
Yes. Quite often people keep repeating the same patterns, don't they? Because they're looking to make it work and to yeah
Yes. And
win
I
out in the
know
end.
I think I'll be quite clear. It's not an excuse,
Oh,
but it can explain, it can be an explanation which and explanations can help us to have compassion. Mm,
yeah, yeah,
believe.
yeah, yeah. Because yeah, I mean, come across clients with other sort of compulsions or addictions, because that comes up quite a lot, doesn't it, with
Mm,
complex trauma?
absolutely. Coping strategies, really.
Yeah,
We have healthy and not so healthy coping strategies. Yes.
yeah. So, is there anything you come up against that's particularly odd or
Um, Not really, no.
no?
I mean, there's alcohol, there's I mean, if
Yeah,
someone's
the usual
actively
ones. Yeah,
if someone's actively using drugs and alcohol, then I would look to be making sure that they were accessing an additional support group,
yeah,
and committed to that, because that wouldn't be something that I would focus in on. It wouldn't really be possible to work with them with active
yeah.
addictions, but um, certainly it equally wouldn't be something that I would be dismissive of. I
Mm,
feel that these are coping strategies for people, and equally cutting, self-harm, gambling, sex addiction, all of these things, shopping addiction, eating or not eating, all of these things are coping strategies. And
yeah,
it's really important that the client isn't made to feel even more ashamed of them than they probably
yeah,
already. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But shame's a big thing, isn't it? And
It's a
yeah, if you
huge
can
thing.
get to the root of that, then
Mm,
that really helps. Yeah,
mm.
yeah,
I think that when we think of trauma, when we think of trauma, we might think, or particularly complex trauma, people might think, oh, then something really, really, really bad must have happened to somebody. And immediately people think about child sexual abuse or these kinds of things. And actually, of course, it can be a range of things. But I do think that probably the most pervasive kind of trauma is childhood neglect.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I feel that drive to be recognized, to be acknowledged, to be welcomed that we have the minute we're born, when that's not available to us, is completely annihilating.
Mm. Yes. We have to be welcomed into the world as a person. If
Yeah,
nobody does that, where does it leave us? Yeah. Who
exactly,
are we?
exactly.
Yeah.
And the shame that can be generated from that, it can be absolutely palpable. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that sort of environment, people are shamed, aren't they? Because they're not welcome. And
Yeah.
yeah, so people try and put all sorts of stuff on them, their own stuff on them. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It is a big thing, isn't it? I think it's something we ought to teach the world about somehow. And people ought to know a lot more about attachment theory and things like
Yes.
that.
Yes, yes. And of course, no attachment is perfect because
Certainly not.
we're all going to have some of, whether it's secure, avoidant, or anxious, we're all going to have some of those things incorporated. But so long as we have enough of the secure attachment, then we can still function quite well.
Yeah, that's what's really important. Yeah. Um, so how come trauma, when someone experiences trauma, affects their relationship with the world, family, friends, work,
Mm.
things like that?
Well, I suppose that again, psychodynamically thinking, if we're if we're disconnected from ourself, from our sense of self through trauma, which is what trauma does to us, it's inevitably going to affect our ability to connect to others, um, or be in relationship with others, if you like. Uh, so, oh, I've lost the thread of the question again. Sorry, Celia.
Yeah,
I don't,
how it affects our relationships with the world, the
with the
outside
world,
world.
yes, yes. Um, so we might be disconnected. We're disconnected if we're disconnected from ourselves, dissociated. We use the word dissociated from
Hmm.
ourselves. Then we're going to be disconnected from others. And that's sometimes where pets can be helpful.
Yes.
Because pets don't require anything from us.
No.
And children very often as well. There is that acceptance of who we are in the moment, who we are as we are in the moment. Whereas people can be more complex, of course. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Remember things and hope for things. And yeah.
yes, yes. And nature equally doesn't require anything of us,
Mm,
but we
yeah.
can get plenty from being in nature. But I think that there's lots that others can do. Um, I mean, there's this trauma-informed approach or trauma-informed care that is being bandied around increasingly. And actually, I'm not really sure that the majority of people that are bandying it around really understand what that means.
Yes.
But that might sound a bit scathing.
Yeah.
But it has become a bit of a buzzword. And very often, when you scratch the surface, you're going, actually, well, what are you doing here in terms of trauma-informed care? And my feeling is that the most important thing that others can do to support a traumatized individual is to acknowledge what, not I understand what you're feeling, but rather I can see whatever they can see. I can see that you're feeling upset. I can see that you're feeling sad, and I can see that you're crying, or I can see that you're feeling angry. So just acknowledging what's there, not giving any reason or any personal take on it, just acknowledging what we can see can be really, really helpful.
So that's all that needs to be done, just to acknowledge, notice, and not judge.
Not judge, exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel it does give the traumatized individual, the triggered individual, a bit of space. It gives them a bit of space, and we can leave it at that. Or if they want to say something, they can, and or we might want to add. I wonder if there's something that would be helpful to you right now. And again, leaving space. There might be, there might not be.
Yeah. I suppose the important thing there is not to get all worked up yourself when you're working with somebody
Exactly.
who's like that.
Or try to rescue.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Can you say something about how you look after yourself when you're working with these people? But it looks as though you've done some really deep work with, people in all sorts of difficult situations. Does it upset you sometimes?
Yeah. Well, it I feel it. I feel it. But
Yes.
I think I really value the way I was trained. And I value, that's what I really value about the psychodynamic approach, is because it is very boundaried. And we
Yes.
are trained to remain, and if I say detached, I don't mean disconnected, but I mean
You're not getting
allowing
sucked in.
exactly,
Yeah.
allowing
Yeah.
space between us and the client, keeping our own story out of the way,
Yeah.
just being with the client rather than doing anything for the client.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because being with the client is enough, and showing up
Okay.
being with the
Yeah.
client is enough.
And how do they help you to do that, to be um, not get sucked in?
Really by always remembering that it's the client's process,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Not yours. Yeah.
and not mine. Yes, exactly. And to to always remember that I can never know what's really going on for a client.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I can only know what they bring into the room, but even then, I can never know how that really feels for a client.
No.
In the transference, I do get the feeling of how it is for the client, and sometimes they're
Yeah.
not aware of that, and that's where the body work can be useful, because I might say, "That's interesting. When you said that, I got a strong feeling in my throat, or a feeling of constriction in my throat, or a pain in my knee, or something like that." And sometimes that can be completely in keeping with what the client's experiencing
Yes.
and relevant to
Yes.
their trauma.
Because you're sort of
Sometimes,
tuned in. Yeah.
yes, sometimes they're
Mm-hmm.
not aware of it, but might become
Yeah.
aware of it in that moment.
Mm. Mm.
But just going back to the self-care, so the boundaries in the psychic space, if you like, are really important and really
Yes.
valuable. But of course, there are some clients that get under the radar, if you like, and that
Yeah,
touch deeply. But I
yeah.
just, I do regular things, like I do walk in nature every day.
Hmm.
So I do make sure I'm taking regular exercise, at least in terms of walking. I do practice Tai Chi and yoga practice, so
Yeah,
body practice there. I take a bath every day at the end of the day.
yes,
And being
yeah.
immersed in water, because being immersed in water feels very cleansing in terms of cleansing any energies off me.
Mm,
Uh, Sometimes I do make sure that I regularly see people, connect with others, all the things I haven't had
yes,
my clients to do.
ordinary people, yes.
Yes. And I do some meditation practice as well, um, and things that bring me joy, you know.
Yes, yeah,
And
that's really important. Mm,
and
yeah,
sometimes people say to me, "Oh, but it's selfish to put myself first." I'm going, well, I wonder about that, because actually, if we don't look after ourselves, how can we possibly be available to support others?
no, we can't. No, no, we've got to put our, aren't we number one? Yes, if we're not sorted ourselves, how can we help anybody else?
Mm.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to say about your work that people might find interesting?
Um, well, I think that um, I think that the thing with complex trauma is being realistic, uh, and well, it wouldn't be my practice to make any promises anyway if someone came to therapy that, this therapy is going to sort them out, because we have absolutely no idea how things are going to unfold. And of course, we can hope that it will improve how they're
Mm,
feeling, but there's certainly no guarantee of cure. And with complex trauma, I do believe that um, we we live with it. We're always going to live with it to a certain degree.
mm,
That therapy, and I say this from my experience as a therapist, and witnessing what happens with clients, is I do believe that therapy, on the whole, can help us to make the symptoms of the complex trauma feel more manageable,
yeah.
and
So,
thereby improve our quality of life.
okay, yeah.
However, uh, I'm quite honest by saying, well, we might get ourselves feeling in a more stable state and a more connected
Mm,
state, and a happier state. However, life is life, and normal events of life can include things like relationship breakups, or death, or loss of a loved one, or unexpected accidents, or unexpected world events, which can shake us. And those are the times that we might find that we need to implement our stabilization techniques a bit more rigorously, or a bit more mindfully. But if we have the stabilization techniques, then we have strategies to help us, healthy coping strategies to help us, rather than perhaps needing to find ourselves going back to the less healthy strategies that we might have been using to support ourselves prior
yeah.
to coming to therapy. Mm.
Mm, yeah, because we can't fix everybody totally, but we can help with some things that do work. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I also do. Again, I mean, psychodynamically, we have a principle of not working, or not even signposting people to other support
Yeah.
strategies. But I have, again, through working with complex trauma, become much more systemic in my thinking about that. Um, and supported by a principally systemic supervisor as well, which has been really helpful in my work with complex trauma, because I firmly believe that other support strategies, not another therapist at the same time, I'm still clear about that,
No.
one
yeah.
therapist at a time, because otherwise there can be conflicting ideas or approaches. But
Thank you.
I firmly do believe that a support group or um, anything that's supportive,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
maybe a massage
Swimming
therapist.
classes, a group, yeah, massage.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yes.
It can be very much a helpful part to the client's healing process.
Yeah,
Mm.
and it gets them out into the world and communicating with people
Yes. Yeah.
rather than staying in and being stuck in their own things going round and round. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it's been a delight talking to you.
Thank you so much, Celia. It's been
Yes,
an absolute pleasure.
and I look forward to seeing you again in and around the complex trauma world. And
Indeed.
yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Indeed. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.